Our next panel delves into the role of large-scale tourism companies and how they can support communities, mobilize employees through volunteerism, and encourage travel behavior. In other words, what can the big guys do? How can they help? Moderating this next panel will be Kelly Louise, the founder and executive director of Impact Travel Alliance, a nonprofit aimed at teaching travelers how to travel in a way that helps local communities and the environment. Now, the last time I saw Kelly was in June at the airport in Doha after a conference in Kathmandu, and we were like bleary-eyed and wandering about the terminal. It's nice to welcome her to my hometown, Washington, D.C. Kelly Louise.
Thank you, Nori. It's always great to have Nori introduce me because she has been a supporter of Impact Travel Alliance since the beginning. So she's seen how it's grown over the years and has been an immense support for our organization. If you're unfamiliar with Impact Travel Alliance, we are a global community and nonprofit that's aimed at teaching travelers how to spend their money mindfully so that they have a positive impact on a local destination. We originally launched in 2015 in New York City, and through the power of social media and word of mouth, we've since grown to a global organization spanning more than 25 cities around the world and more than 20,000 travelers. Our growth is testament not only to the strength of our organization, but also to the rise and interest in sustainable travel. Our mission is rooted in educating consumers how they can make a difference through all of the little touch points on a traveler's journey. We believe that better travel leads to a better world, and we look for opportunities to showcase sustainable travel in an exciting light. For example, traveling in the low season means that there are fewer crowds, and also you're able to combat over-tourism. Flying direct or traveling slower means a more relaxing vacation and also a lower carbon footprint. And connecting with locals in community-based tourism projects means more intimate and immersive experiences for the traveler and allows locals to advocate for how travelers see their home city. At our events, we draw connections between global causes and how travelers can have a positive impact on them. For example, we're gearing up for our next multi-chapter event, a celebration on World Oceans Day, to talk about travel, food, and sustainability and the connections with it, and we'll have different events in 9 cities around the world. Our community is excited, engaged, and eager to learn more. But I think one of the things that we often forget about when we're standing in a room of sustainable travel professionals is how this message is conveyed to travelers themselves. Oftentimes, when I talk about sustainable travel to your average consumer, what they think about is a far-off eco-lodge or a voluntourism opportunity, and these seem far-off and unattainable experiences. At the same time, once you start to explain it a little bit more, a reaction that I often get is, oh, great, that means just shop local, only get local experiences, which in turn often translates to you can't support corporations. But without corporations, the sustainability movement will fail. Sustainable tourism has to be accessible to all travelers and all travel styles. For example, a boutique hotel that implements a completely sustainable regenerative approach is wonderful, and I don't want to discount that. But if they only have 12 rooms, that's limited to the impact of 12 to 24 travelers per night. But on the other side, if there is a huge corporation, and even if that corporation makes one small change in their business model, that has a ripple effect of impact across the entire world. With all of that in mind, I'm proud to represent a grassroots organization alongside panelists working in the corporate, hotel, and aviation space for this conversation on the power of corporate social responsibility. I'd like to bring my panelists up to the stage. And our first panelist is Karen Mileto, who sits on the Global Corporate Responsibility Strategy team for Hilton, driving Hilton's 2030 Travel with Purpose goals. She also serves on the global team. She also serves as the global lead on human rights. Her career stems from her background in international relations, economics, and law, and she has previously worked with the UN Special Representation for Business and Human Rights. Carolyn?
There you go, it's straight to the podium, isn't it? I have a very fancy computer that it's not actually letting me be. Alrighty, sorry. Here we go. Thank you very much for having me today. Whoops, it moves. Okay, won't touch it. Thank you very much for having me today. Thanks for the invitation. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here amongst peers, peers of profession and peers of heart across the whole room, really. And if I know how that works, yeah, being here today is pretty special. Celebrating World Tourism Day in 2019 is very special for us, because this year is when we turn 100 years young at Hilton. And when our founder, Conrad Hilton, founded the company, he said that to achieve big things, you first need to dream big dreams. And that's really what he did when he set up the whole company, which went on to create most of the great innovations that we take for granted today. But in the spirit of Conrad Hilton, ahead of the celebration of our centennial, last year, we launched our Travel with Purpose 2030 goals, which are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. And we set ourselves on a mission to cut our environmental footprint in half and double our investment in social impact. Beyond the set of those 23 individual targets that we define under this umbrella, we really embrace the ambition to redefine sustainable travel. And that's an ambition that we see as a collective. And as a collective, we needed to get our guests to come along on the journey with us. There was a recent survey done by Booking.com, actually, on sustainable travel, and they found that 87% of travelers want to travel sustainably. Not surprising. Now, the first barrier, though, for them to do so is, interestingly, awareness before costs. So really reflecting upon that, when we are thinking about the role that we can play, especially as large players, to your point, we have the fiduciary duty to enable our guests to actually travel sustainably. They need to know and to feel that when they stay with those bigger companies, not the 12-room eco-lodge, they are still playing a part in a virtuous cycle of sustainable tourism. And so this is really how we have invested into our different programs. We have 23 targets under the 2030 goals, and I want to give you just a couple of examples of how it would come to life in a very specific destination and how travelers could see it. So, for example, in Abuja, it could look like the shop at the hotel that you would be visiting. And what you would find there is actually new pieces and very innovative pieces of arts and clothing that actually come from the surplus linen that the hotel has given to ACE Charity, which is a social enterprise that empowers women to set up their own enterprises. There are now over 10 women who have set up their own businesses, literally out of that Women Empowerment Program, by getting all the support in kind and in skills from our hotels, as well as, again, not a handout but a hand up, a contract to buy back the items that they would be producing through their enterprises. In Sri Lanka, it looks like the plates that you will have in our restaurant, where the fresh produce come from a local farm that is being supported by the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, with whom we have a global partnership to upskill, train smallholder farmers and give them access to markets to bigger players, because once they start being able selling to us from a health and safety perspective and from an access perspective, then it's an opportunity across the board for our broader industry. In Saudi Arabia, it looks like a training in hospitality that we have delivered to over 200 women to enter the hospitality industry. We have doubled the number of women that we have in our teams across the whole of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia over time. And this is going to be the friendly front office managers that will be welcoming you across the kingdom. Finally, in Cape Town, you will be able to see in your room the pilot that we are doing on inviting you to join us on our water stewardship journey. This is in partnership with WWF, where we are investing in water replenishment in the area of Cape Town that is providing the fresh water sources for over 80% of the city, where we link with you, our guests and travelers, the operations, the behavior in your rooms with the investments we make in our communities. So all of these examples are really just stories of how we bring Global 2030 goals to life in individual destinations. And this actually has a name. It's called the Hilton Effect. As mentioned earlier today, actually by Intrepid on the video, right? Travelers want to know more about the companies they travel with. And to the point of the introduction, which I think is so critical, they also want to make sure that by staying with the bigger guys, it's not actually participating into the problem, right? And so going back to the stats about the challenges being more around the lack of awareness, how can our guests, how can travelers be confident that when they stay with their travel partners, they're actually playing into that virtual circle? Well, at Hilton, we believe that we believe in relentless measurements, tracking, and improvements. And this is what we have been doing for now 10 years through our proprietary platform, which is called Lightstay, where we track, measure, and improve all of our social and environmental data. Every single hotel, it's almost 6,000 hotels by now, must report on their environmental and social data on Lightstay. This is a requirement as per the brand standards. We verified those data. This is third-party verified, and this is what led us to be certified to ISO 9001, quality management 14001, environments 50001, energy. If you didn't know, over half, so the largest portfolio of commercial buildings certified to ISO 14001 around the world are Hilton hotels. So when we say that we take our fiduciary responsibility seriously, we mean it. This is not just an ad somewhere. This is actually action that we relentlessly measure and track across all of our hotels. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline. Our next panelist is Denise Naguib. Originally born in Cairo, Denise has a background in biological and human impacts on the environment. Her career has taken her around the world to work with Jean-Michel Cousteau's Ocean Future Society and eventually to her current role as the Vice President of Sustainability and Supplier Diversity at Marriott. Denise.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to share with you Surf 360, Marriott International's sustainability and social impact platform that we launched just over 2 years ago as we reset our company's strategy and focus in these two very important areas. As we are the hotel company with the largest number of hotels around the world, we don't want to just be the biggest, but the most responsible. So it was really important for us as we set that journey to think about what does that mean for us, for our stakeholders around the world, for our 750,000 associates that wear Marriott name badges, for our owners, et cetera. We focused on 4 specific areas: nurture our world, sustain responsible operations, empower through opportunity, and welcome all and advance human rights. And there are a ton of specific goals that we have within each of these. I want to focus a little bit on the nurture our world, where we focus on volunteerism and natural capital projects around the world. But embedded within all of these are also things like focusing on peace and cultural understanding to, as we know, travel creates this connection point between people that mitigates some of those tension points that happen around the world. From a Nurture Our Worlds, I mentioned, it's really focused, our focus areas are around vitality of children, ensuring that we are delivering aid in communities, especially at times of disaster, as well as really looking at natural capital projects. And this is a whole sea of the goals that we focus on, but specifically here, 3 very clear goals that we have by 2025. We want to empower our associates around the world to volunteer in the communities where they call home. And our goal is to get to 15 million hours of volunteer time from 2016 to 2025. And our report will come out next week, but we're just over 3.5 million hours of volunteer hours. And not just any kind of volunteer hours, we want to make sure that they're focused on the areas of focus of the company and the areas that we can support our communities. And 50% of those volunteer hours must be in skills-based volunteerism. So to ensure, again, that we're building the support mechanisms in the communities, whether it be to work with women, to empower them to stand up their own businesses, similar to what Caroline mentioned, working with challenged youth to get them to learn and understand their opportunities to be part of the hospitality sector, or working with refugees that are coming into communities where they've never been before and showing them the pathways that they can take within our industry. Additionally, we really very much feel the power and the opportunity to invest in and be part of solutions for natural capital. So we have a lot of opportunities both for us directly to engage, but also for our travelers to engage with us. We have many programs such as mangrove planting in Thailand, where travelers to the locations where they can participate, especially in the Phuket region, can be part of the actual mangrove plantings in those communities. 11 years ago, we invested in 1.4 million acres of the Amazon rainforest, and we didn't just give a community money and say, we want you to save the trees. We specifically set out to ensure that they had livelihood mechanisms to ensure that they are continuing to have economic growth without depleting the trees. And so they are harvesting Brazil nuts, they are sustainably fishing fish, and those products are being sold into the hotels far upriver from where those locations are, but then our hoteliers are able to use them and share the story with travelers that are coming to the Amazon areas. We also have opportunities in both Canada and the United States and growing for guests to pass over their housekeeping have a housekeeping cleaning service in lieu of having a tree planted for each night that they forgo housekeeping. And so far, we've planted well over 100,000 trees in Canada, and are reaching that similar milestone in the United States in just a handful of months by guests every day saying, you know what, this is important to me. And they can go in and see where those trees are planted in the communities near where they have stayed. And then we have a very, very focused effort as a company also, as I mentioned, on volunteerism. The picture on the bottom right here is our annual day of Spirit to Serve our communities. We're around the world, and here our headquarters are here in Bethesda in this area. We put people out into the communities to participate with our partners all over the world and volunteer. And we also have an amazing number, I think around 130 million Bonvoy members. That's our loyalty program. And as people earn points from all over the world in their stays and travel experiences with us, we want them to be part of the engagement with our major partners. So for each of our 4 coordinates, we have identified major partners that we work with and allowed our guests to use their points as a way to donate those points to the nonprofits that we are partners with. In addition, we have regional partners that we are adding to the list. So if people are in the Middle East, they can donate to Middle Eastern partners, if they're in South America, et cetera. And this is a really great opportunity also for major corporate partners, so corporations that host major meetings with us where they earn a lot of points for doing that, but they don't keep those points, they need to do something with them. And so it's another opportunity for them to donate millions of those points back to nonprofit partners of ours. So overall, we absolutely feel like it is our responsibility, and there's so many great examples all over the world that our individual hotels are doing, whether it's taking guests down into the communities to be part of those solutions, or our associates around the world being part of the solutions within the communities to ensure that sustainable social entrepreneurship and investment in those communities is very much at our core and has been for our young 93, not quite 100-year-old history as Hilton. Thank you.
And to introduce our last panelist, David Rivard. He serves on the board of directors for the Airline Ambassadors International, the airline industry's only relief and development organization. AAI is the leading advocate for human trafficking in the aviation industry and has spearheaded legislation efforts as well as providing the only peer-to-peer training on human trafficking. David's background is rooted in business development in diverse realms, including medicine, politics, and property development.
Yes, hello out there. This is really somewhat of a homecoming for myself, actually, and for our organization right now, because we have a lot of people, obviously, from the tourism industry. And when I look around, I think I'm probably the most apt person in the audience right now to make an observation. And how many people know where the term sustainable development originated from? It was actually at the Rio Earth Summit, and it's a parable of how I met my wife as well. In fact, back in 1992, the Rio Earth Summit, it was called the UN Commission on Human Development. My wife and I were veterans of the 1972 Conference on Sustainable Development, and let's see here. Here we go. Let's see, how can I? Oh, the big green, okay. That's what I had my glasses on here. But in any case, airline ambassadors started out at the United Nations during the Earth Summit. My wife was a person who brought 6 or 7 flight attendants with her, and she did everything the United Nations told her not to do. Don't go to the favelas, we don't want a global incident here. I, on the other hand, was a patron of environmental and conservation organizations. I was representing the Environmental Grant-Making Association back then. And even back then, we were slinging around about a $3 billion budget. So we were out there talent scouting. And airline ambassadors subsequently progressed into an organization of airline industry personnel, flight attendants, pilots, ground personnel, all frontline industrial personnel. And at that time, I thought the WTO logically stood for the World Trade Organization. And now I see how really with this relationship building that the tourism industry has been accomplishing over the years, that in fact it really has morphed into a true development scenario for many, many countries. We provide, we have 3 major programs. One's an escort program, where we escort children in need of medical attention all over the world. The other is we're known as a relief and development organization. In fact, a few days ago, I just came from the Bahamas. We've done all the major man-made and natural disasters since, I would say, around 1996. We have partnered with a lot of the UN entities. We still maintain membership, in fact, with the OAS. Around after Katrina, we got a lot of members of the airline industries, pilots, and former military that started working with our organization in relief development, as we partnered as well with local NGOs. And we wound up getting assigned tail landing slots, for example, in Haiti. During that time as well, we started working along with the local police, because it was a tremendous responsibility to get the aid out right away. But in the course of our relationship with the Haitian National Police, who we included into the aid delivery schemes, we found out about human trafficking. Right after the earthquake, there was 30,000 kids that were trafficked and this is just 3 months after the earthquake. So logically, UNICEF initiated a Brigade for Protection of Minors among the Haitian National Police. Airline ambassadors subsequently, through our members, we invited the Haitian National Police to the very first conference that was done on human trafficking. It was in Dallas in 2011. We had, at that time, First Lady Bush with us, and we proceeded with our global human trafficking training. And in the course of developing these partnerships as well, we've worked with Interpol, for example, United Nations on Drugs and Crime. We discovered the reality of human trafficking, which you may want to think of as all things illicit trafficking, including wildlife trafficking, money laundering, quite obviously, drug trafficking, arms trafficking. It's related to terrorism. But many of our programs now are pretty much tailored towards the industry groups and international law enforcement agencies that deal in these all things human trafficking today. What we have done is we've conducted 110 trainings now around the world in conjunction with these high-level authorities right now. And we've discovered, in fact, that we, through our membership, have been able to transform the landscape of human trafficking. And I'm glad to take questions later on. Thank you.
I'm going to start this off with a question for Denise, because you specifically talked a lot about volunteering opportunities. And when you're putting together those programs, how do you ensure that you're actually doing good in those local communities rather than just feeling good about those efforts?
That's a really good point. I think first is we want to make sure that the areas of focus that we volunteer and we direct our associates to volunteer are really areas that we are working in as an organization. So we understand what's happening in that space. So there are a lot of places you can spend your time, energy, and dollars. And so we can't be everything to everyone. And so it's really important for us to understand where our strengths lie and where we can really put that time and energy in. We also do work a lot with large organizations that do have presence all over the world. So that helps us establish that trust first and foremost, and to ensure that we are indeed focusing on the right places. And as I mentioned, a lot of the things are also connected back to our world, right? So while we're not working on the refugee issue at grand scale, we are focusing specifically on how do we work with refugees to become and come into the workforce within hospitality. So it really is about trying to kind of not try to boil the ocean and do every volunteer area that we can, but really the areas that are most impactful that we can really provide skills or support mechanisms within the communities where we are. And we really try to also keep it local, right? We have associates all over the world, so we want to make sure that they and any guest engagements are working within those communities and really understanding their communities. We also have what's called business councils, about 120 of them around the world that are our leaders, general managers. They know their market best, and so they are really a very critical group to understand what are the connections in the market, who should we be working with in those areas, and how do we make sure that we empower the community of hoteliers around to work in those markets in the most effective way.
Representing corporations of such scale, how do you, and this can be for anyone, but how do you ensure that your actions do stay local and that you're having a positive long-term impact on local communities?
Sure, very happy to talk to that. I guess that's where having a strategy and very clear goals really helps, because you are tracking towards really measurable impact. And so when we launch our 2030 goals, we define those goals in partnership with our global partners, including the International Youth Foundation, the World Wildlife Fund, and others, to make sure that the way that we would design those goals and those impacts would be meaningful, would be impactful, and would be sustainable. And so that's really how we would get that insights. The other part is also where we use, well, data, right? Data to make sure that we are also tackling the most important issues at a global level and at a destination level. So we're using some data intelligence around the different risk areas in the destinations where we operate across, like, water scarcity or youth vulnerability or risks of modern slavery or women's and girls' rights. And so what we've done is that we have that aspect at a global level, and this is directly fed into our corporate strategy and fed into the annual risk survey that we conduct internally. So that defines kind of the global strategy. At a local level, very similar, to make it really stick and relevant to the local destinations. Again, leveraging Lightstay, right? That platform that we have. Every single hotel has a profile on Lightstay. And we give the hotels a snapshot of the color-coded risks in their destination, literally. So your general manager, you open up your page on Lightstay and you can see that in your destination, your operating environment is red on water, green on youth, and orange on waste management. Well, then now you know that as you have a limited amount of time to volunteer, of money to invest, or focus on training even for your team to really prioritize laser focus for this week, this quarter, this year, you know where to go. And you will tackle, in this case, water stewardship, right? Because this is the biggest risk. And biggest risk to the community that will have a ripple effect on your operations anyway. So really to make it stick, that's where we provide data and where we provide then, of course, the whole suite of partners and tools to help them take action where it matters.
And I'll just add to that in that we also track the data, both the in-kind and hours, as well as the cash contributions within every single community at the individual hotel level, and then up to what we are calling the business council, so a region or a small market, up to the continent and then globally. So we can see through time how the community, we're not giving those dollars from corporate, it's from ground up, the efforts that the hotels are doing, so we can see that impact through time in different communities and map it up against our growth in those markets. So do we have a whole bunch of hotels that are opening up in a certain market? We should see the growth in those particular metrics because of that volume growth. And so that's kind of a side way to look at it in terms of the impact is the hours spent, the in-kind and cash contributions in those markets.
Yes, well, we're involved, obviously, in the human trafficking training component. And in fact, we met with a lot of resistance from the industry, from the airline industry, which is why we had to go the legislative route, and we had to somehow tag human trafficking as a cabin safety issue. Industry groups, as you know, they have a board of directors, they have other responsibilities in terms of shareholder interests. So what we had to do is first of all, impact the FAA regulations in 2016. And then it was a little later, the ICAO's, another UN organization for international commercial travel. We actually had to have a Circular 352 that now mandates training in the airline industry. More and more now, we have seen these trainings morph into trainings for the hotel industries. We work with Marriott and Hilton Hotels, as well as international law enforcement. Everyone, in fact, now involved in the travel industry, we believe, and as mandated by law, has a responsibility to see something, say something, as the DHS program would say. We have a program called Recognize It and Report It, and that's the other. We went back to the United Nations. I remember 2 years ago, where one of our traffic survivors got a standing ovation. She was actually from the hospitality industry, and who had the foresight to hire her, and who embarked. In fact, it was Marriott Hotels that they actually started a human trafficking training program there. So, in other words, we are conducting our social responsibility activities and traveling to do good, one of the many monikers that we had when we first started, into now human trafficking, because it turns out that it's a $160 billion a year business. When you think of it, more than Google, Starbucks, or Nike combined. So you can only imagine the economic impact that non-transparent money makes in any economy. Thanks.
When James spoke earlier about Intrepid being the world's largest B Corp company, one of the things that I think is really interesting about the fact that Intrepid is a certified B Corp is that I had the opportunity once to talk to Daryl Wade, the co-founder, about how that was possible. And he said it was because it had always been built into the ethos of the company. And Caroline, I know that's something that you mentioned as well in your presentation about how it's been important from the start. But when you look at a company even as large as Hilton or Marriott or the aviation industry, those are a lot larger in scope and practice than Intrepid is. So how do you ensure that your efforts as a CSR representative are positively conveyed throughout the entire organization when there's so many levels of different stakeholders in the company?
Happy to start. So yes, definitely the kind of your DNA, right? Your DNA, your ethos, your vision, definitely is where you start, because you can embed as many metrics as you want. If you don't live it, if you don't believe it, it's not gonna necessarily stick. So it has to be embedded as part of the culture. The other part is, again, back to metrics, right? And the way that we do it, and what we've been doing successfully for 10 years now, is that the sustainability has been a brand standard for 10 years. Lightstay has been a brand standard for 10 years. And that's really that long-lasting commitment that is really lived and bred through every single one of our brands, and so every single one of our hotels, that actually ultimately gave us the 10 years of data that helped us launch our science-based targets. So we were the first major hotel company to launch our science-based targets in line with the Paris Agreement last year. And that was really a consequence of that long-bred habits and commitments to sustainability. If you want to expand that to other areas, we continue to see the importance of confirming and embedding in our brand standards some of our commitments. It's not necessarily where we start. We don't necessarily start with brand standard, because again, then that would be like kind of putting a mandate before having the culture. So typically we get the buy-in and we get the practice, and then we confirm those practices into brand standards. Other examples is like zero soap to landfill. We were also the first hotel company to commit to that last year. And step by step, this is going through brand standards across most of our brands now. Local sourcing. 50% of our brands have brand standards that require local sourcing. And then last but not least, in the human rights space, expanding the understanding of human trafficking, sexual exploitation being for 4.8 million, and forced labor being for 16 million across the world. We are now looking at new countries that we may enter, and we're doing a human rights due diligence on every single new country. We scan every single country for their human rights performance and the risks around human rights. Any mitigation plan that we develop, basically saying, here's what it would take for us as Hilton to live up to our standards, to our values, to our code in those countries. If there are any steps that are required above and beyond our regular policies, given the operating environments, those mitigation steps are now a brand standard. Every new hotel that may operate in those countries where we have deemed necessary to have extra steps to mitigate human rights is a brand standard. And this is something that we had to create. It didn't really exist in the hospitality industry or in the franchising industry, for that matter. And we had to do that because that's who we are. That's how we do it. So we use what we have available at our place. And further to your point earlier, that's what big business can do. we can actually literally make a commitment, a behavior standard across the world. And now it's 6,000 hotels across the world.
I think similarly, culture is so critical to who we are and what our company is all about. And serve our world is one of our 5 core values, and it's been that way from the beginning. And so all of this work under our platform sits underneath one of our core values. So it is really an important kind of framework that if you are part of the company, these are the values that you're responsible for understanding and being part of. And we have really set out over the last 2 years since we launched our new platform and goals for an unstoppable, everyday communication pathway to make sure that everybody around the company receives information to know what they can do. So whether it's great stories, and everybody is inspired by something different. So to keep it alive, we have a variety of areas of focus, and within that, we communicate literally every day a different kind of touch point or story or success that has hit one of those areas to keep the messaging continuously going. We also have a really robust champions model. So within our hotels, we have, I think, 14,000 Serve 360 champions now that are in the hotels. They're responsible for understanding the platform. They have quarterly communications that they are part of, and they are the inspiration within their hotels to keep the ideas going up to corporate in terms of future programs, but also for us to be able to use them as a communication and inspiration vehicle. So it really does have to be both top down and bottom up.
Yes, and well, again, this is a history lesson, I guess, more for me, more than anybody else. And that is, it's so heartening to see the World Tourism organizations, entities, people who are dealing in tourism, to follow these various protocols and human rights that have been laid forth. I remember in the 1992 Earth Summit, the subsequent Vienna Human Rights Summit, the Women's Summit in Beijing, Population Summit in Cairo, all these so-called high-minded ideas that have now matured and have worked their way into the mainstay of our economy, I think is so important. We recently gave human trafficking Train the Trainer to AirAsia 2 years ago, and now the CEOs of both Cathay Pacific, Delta, and AirAsia have given over $1 million each for each airline to address this issue of training their staff on how to recognize human trafficking. These protocols now have, as I said, worked their way into these companies in a way that really makes a difference. And yeah, I think that is what I have to say on that.
We have about 2 minutes left, so I want to open it up in the back in the blue shirt.
Hi, good afternoon. My question is directed toward Denise and Caroline. As most people in this room know, the large hotel brands don't really own their properties. They're mostly owned by other individuals. We've heard a lot about how your companies are bringing along your associates, your employees, and your guests. I'd like you to please address the owners and how you are engaging them or not, challenges you might be having in bringing them along. We heard about brand standards, and I wonder how your owners are receiving those, or even if they're going beyond. Or also, if you could address on a similar note, the design and development, the real estate portfolio, when you're talking about new construction and new builds.
Wow, okay, that's a lot. So just quick, like micro education for everyone. Yes, you're very right, sir. We don't own most of our hotels. They are either owned by individuals, groups of individuals, institutional investors, real estate investment trusts, et cetera. However, Caroline mentioned a few times this idea of brand standards. How you keep a Marriott or Hilton flag on your hotel is by following the brand standards that are audited on a regular basis. And if you fail them, you don't get to keep the flag. That's sort of how it works. So it is a really important stick that is used, but we also obviously have to leverage carrots. So a couple of things for us, I think, from an owner perspective. We have a large contingent of corporate customers that require things of our hotels in order for those customers to do business with us. That is the revenue carrot that we absolutely leverage to ensure that our owners understand the value and importance of gathering the information to be able to provide things like carbon footprint, water footprint, sustainability reporting, et cetera, to the customers by requiring it, but ensuring that owners understand that there's the value on the other side in terms of committing to those businesses and getting preference from those customers. So that's one very clear example. There are other times where our owners are further ahead than us, and it's really important for us to listen and understand what they're doing. We have a group of owners, for example, that have started a subcommittee in the Caribbean, Latin America, because they absolutely want to do way more than we're giving them in terms of direction, but we are learning from them and then bringing those back in and leveraging them. So it's really a two-way conversation.
Absolutely. So that's all of that, plus a couple of examples that are complementary as well in terms of owners who go further, which really for us as in-house sustainability and CR professionals is just gold. So a couple of examples. Our Conrad in New York is owned by Goldman Sachs. And they were the ones who asked us to really, really push the envelope on all the amenities, on the no plastic. Well, we've been working with them. We've been working on that for like over 2 years, and really making. They want their hotel to be the most sustainable ever, which is really inspiring because they push the envelope for us, and then we can leverage our whole engine to deliver on their ask, and then we're learning in the process. Another example in the UK is Shiva Hotels, and they own 5 or 6 hotels, and they have a charitable arm, the Shiva Foundation. And we've been working with Shiva Foundation for now 4 years, I want to say, and together we co-founded in 2016 the UK Stop Slavery Hotel Industry Network, which was basically gathering a lot of the best practices that exist out there for the hotels and the hospitality industry to identify and mitigate risks of modern slavery and human trafficking. Together we co-wrote and co-launched a whole framework that helps hotels engage with their suppliers, especially because of the complex dynamic and structure of the hospitality industry, right? Who owns the suppliers? Is it the owner? Is it the brands? Which might be a segue to your point on the construction side. So with that structure, because we don't own our hotels, we don't appoint the construction companies. That's one piece. The other piece is the architecture and design standards. Those are defined by the brands. They are. But they are also developed in discussion with the owners. So it is still a negotiation at the end of the day. There is zero tolerance or zero negotiation on things like fire life safety. But it seems like granted, and as it should be today. But you can imagine that it is a discussion because the laws are actually very different across the board, right? Whatever law you have here on fire life safety might not be there in another country. But we, as an industry, and that's why we are the best brands in the industry, there's just whatever you get on fire life safety, you get that anywhere in the world, non-negotiable. And so with the example I was giving just before on the new countries and where we're making a brand standard, for example, on mitigation steps for identification of risks of modern slavery, this is where we are starting to move into more of the owner space and to tell them what we expect them to do. Why? Safety of the people. So when we will require, for example, that in certain markets, the appointed construction companies by the owner must be trained in modern slavery and forced labor. In certain markets, because we've done the homework, we know there is a risk, and we don't own or manage those business relationships, but because of the brands, because it's our name on it, We will require that. And so we have a risk-based approach, right? It's not, we don't, because also they know what they are doing. This is the whole point. It's their hotel. It's the way that they want to build it. But where required based on the risk, we will. And to your question in terms of response, the response has been positive, actually. Because at the end of the day, we are aligned. We are very fortunate to work with owners and ownership groups who are aligned on fundamental values in terms of safeguarding rights. And so they welcome the guidance, they welcome the support, and that's where we're here to help accompany them.
Just going to add that we also work together as an industry. So we have already set goals as an industry, which really helps, because if we're all in it together, then our owners are in it with us because they've just got us. So it does really help. There's a lot of effort that we do together as an industry, and we move that forward as an industry, whether it be human trafficking or carbon, water, et cetera, that we really are moving it together.
That's on that one. So specifically on human rights, that's an international tourism partnership. We launched the forced labor forced labor principles. It's international tourism partnership forced labor principles, right? We sweated the tear and sweat really on those ones, but collaboratively, literally, you will probably see the handwriting of both Marriott and Hilton teams and the rest of the industry on that. And now, exactly to Denise's point, we share that with our owners. If they don't like it and they say, oh, I don't want this, I'm going to turn to Marriott. Well, guess what? It's going to be the same song, same rules. We agreed on the same principles because there is no negotiation around forced labor. So totally in terms of industry collaboration.
I think that's a great note to end on. Collaboration is certainly key, and having those partnerships in that community is something that can really push the industry forward. Caroline, Denise, David, thank you so much.